Henry Kissinger served 2 presidents as Secretary of State, with a history in government described as both influential and polarizing. The German-born American diplomat played a pivotal role in opening up diplomatic relations between the United States and China, but also plotted against democratically elected socialist governments in South America. His role in normalizing relations between Washington and Beijing lauded.
Without Kissinger's efforts in engineering the opening to China and for U.S.-China to reestablish diplomatic relations, it's not guaranteed we'd have a reform and opening. It's not guaranteed we'd have markets. It's not guaranteed we'd have the affluence we have today. So I'm not saying that all Chinese recognize this, but I think that intellectuals do know that without a U.S.-China détente, better relations until the end of the 80s, China wouldn't have the international space to grow as it did.
In the 1970s, Kissinger had a hand in many of the epoch-changing global events of the decade, while serving as Secretary of State under Republican Presidents Richard Nixon and Gerald Ford. The Jewish refugees' efforts also led to landmark U.S.-Soviet arms control talks, expanded ties between Israel and its Arab neighbors, and the Paris Peace Accord with North Vietnam in 1973, for which he later received a joint awarding of the Nobel Peace Prize, even though the war between North and South Vietnam raged on.
Secretary Kissinger really set the standard for everyone who followed in this job. I was very privileged to get his counsel many times, including as recently as about a month ago. He was extraordinarily generous with his wisdom, with his advice. Few people were better students of history. Even fewer people did more to shape history than Henry Kissinger.
Kissinger is also described as someone who would go down in history as the architect of U.S. intervention to overthrow democracy and embrace dictatorship in Latin America, including in Chile. This was Kissinger after receiving the Pentagon's Distinguished Public Service Award in 2016.
We are involved in religious wars in the Middle East. We have to deal with the rise of countries that see themselves as historically central powers in Asia. We have to deal with Russia, that it's combining the decline of its physical strength with an attempt to reassert its historic predominance in certain regions. And we are challenged by a technology for which there is no precedent.
After leaving government in the mid-1970s, he started a geopolitical consulting firm that kept him in the foreign policy space until his death. Hailed by some for his diplomatic genius, he was labelled a war criminal by others. Born May 27, 1923, Henry Kissinger was 100. Sherwin Bryce-Pease, SABC News, New York.